For it will come on all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch, and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen. This is the end of the Olivet Discourse. And that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man. Let me tell you what this is saying. You're going to have one chance to miss the tribulation if you're in the final generation. And what is that one chance? The rapture. And there is no sign that it's about to happen. Jesus doesn't give you a sign. None of the disciples give you a sign. You're to be watching because you get one chance. And if you miss that one chance, listen to this. You're trapped. You're trapped. There's going to come a day, and I hope it's on a Sunday. Lord, I do. And I'll be up here teaching, and boom, I'll be gone. And if I'm optimistic, I'll say 50% of you will be gone. If I'm not optimistic, I'd say 10% of you will be gone. And the sad part is, if you're sitting here when that takes place, you missed the one chance you had. Pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen. But you missed it. You're either going to die during the tribulation, or you're going to have to endure to the end of the tribulation. But you missed your one chance to escape it all when Jesus came back for his bride. Now, as I said, Jesus answered all three questions, but not in the same order in which they were asked. Or at least the Gospels don't record them in the same order in which they were asked. In fact, the Gospel of Matthew doesn't even record Jesus' answer to the very first question. So we're going to have to use Luke's Gospel to look at Jesus' answer to that question. Now, it looks like from studying all three Gospels that Jesus answered the third question first, the first question second, and the second question last. So here's the order in which Jesus answered their questions. Third question, what's the sign that the end times have begun? Jesus answers this question first, even though it's the last question that they asked. But it makes sense, because there's no way to know whether we're living in the end times or not unless there's some type of sign to let us know that the end times have begun. Yeah. I asked you, are we living in the end time? And every one of you said, yeah. I said, what's the sign? Someone says, it's the fig tree. No, it's not. No, it's not. That's the sign we're the final generation. Not one of you know what the sign is. So you have no idea whether we're living in the end times. Then he answered the first question. When will Jerusalem, the temple, be destroyed? And what will be the sign that it's about to happen? Now, because this event had nothing to do with the end times, Jesus did not want to answer it first. But it's still a very important event, because Jerusalem must be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. So it's a very important event, but not in regards to the end times. It's part of the judgment against Israel for rejecting Jesus as the Messiah, and it sets up the church age, and it explains why there's a 2,000-year gap between when Jesus was crucified and resurrected until when he comes back again. And then he answered the second question last. What's the sign of Jesus coming? Now, the reason he answered this question last, because it's the last event in the tribulation. In fact, when Jesus comes back, he puts an end to the tribulation and he ushers in the Messianic age. So his coming is the end of this age and the beginning of the Messianic age. Let me say that again, because that's very important. When Jesus returns, it's the end of this age and it's the beginning of the Messianic age. It's the pivot point. This ends, this begins. It's kind of like midnight. On the last night before January the 1st, you come to midnight. Well, it's a new year. It's the end of the last year, and it's the beginning of the new year. That's what will happen when Jesus returns. It's the end of this age. It's the beginning of the Messianic age. So it makes sense for Jesus to have answered their questions in the order that he did. In fact, he added some information concerning things that they didn't even ask about, so they would get the complete picture, because Jesus wants us to know. He wants us to have the complete picture. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we go through the Olivet Discourse. In fact, the first thing Jesus shared with them had nothing to do with the end times or any of the questions they asked. Look at Matthew chapter 24, verses 4 through 6. We're going to go through the Olivet Discourse verse by verse. The way I like to teach. We're not just going to hop around. We're going to do it just as Jesus said. Here it goes. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. Don't worry about it. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And as you can see, rather than immediately answering their questions, Jesus began by giving them some general characteristics of the church age. But none of these things were signs that signaled that the end of the age had begun. You see, Jesus wanted to make sure the disciples didn't jump to the conclusion when they saw these false messiahs coming and when they saw wars and rumors of wars that, oh, we're living in the end times, which is what most of you do. Are we living in the end times? Oh, yes, look at our culture. Be not deceived. Don't get worried. I won't tell you what the signs are. If you know what the signs are, you don't have to worry. You know exactly where we are. You know what's taking place. These events were going to happen, but they were not signs that the end of this age had begun. And Jesus wanted to make sure the disciples didn't jump to conclusions and think they were living in the end times when they weren't living in the end times. So look back at verses 4 through 6 again and notice what Jesus said. And Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you not be troubled. Don't be worried about this. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Do you see that? But the end is not yet. These are not signs that they were living in the end times. These were simply things that would happen during the 2,000-year church age. So what did Jesus say would happen? First he said false messiahs would come. Jesus said, Many shall come saying, I am Christ. The word Christ is translated, from the Greek word Christos. Christos means anointed one. It was a messianic title. So he said, Many shall come saying, I am the Messiah. Historically, and this is interesting, historically, Jesus is the very first Jew who ever claimed to be the Messiah. They came to John and they said, Are you the one that we should look for? He said, No. I'm the one preparing the path for him. Before then, no. No Jew ever claimed to be the Messiah until Jesus came. He fulfilled all of the messianic prophecies. He fulfilled every one of them. And some of them were almost impossible to fulfill. But he's the only one that ever came in, or the first one that ever came in and officially presented himself as the Messiah in his triumphal entry. But after him, many have come claiming to be the Messiah. From the time of Jesus until the middle of the 19th century, you've had a large number of Jews, hundreds, who've claimed to be the Messiah. From Simon Bar Kokhba in 132 AD, if you remember that, that's when Hadrian came in, destroyed all of Jerusalem, banned any Jew from even coming inside Jerusalem, to Jacob Frank in the 18th century. And they led many Jews astray. It's interesting. The one true Messiah who fulfilled all of the messianic prophecies they rejected, but many of them were led astray by all these other false messiahs who didn't fulfill any prophecy. They just simply claimed to be the Messiah. But you also had Gentiles claiming to be the Messiah. Now, we're usually familiar with the current ones, people like Jim Jones and David Koresh. They're the most well-known because, they've happened in our lifetime. But there have been hundreds of Gentiles who claim to be the Messiah. And what's interesting, the Christian Messiah. The false messiahs in no way meant that the end times had begun. Secondly, Jesus said there would be wars and rumors of wars, and believe me, there have been. But wars and rumors of wars did not mean that the end of time had begun. No. So, what is the sign or signs that the end of this age has begun? If you remember, that's the third question the disciples asked. And now Jesus is going to answer it. Look at verses 7 and 8. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. But all these things, in these two verses, are the beginning of birth pangs. Now, most people gloss over these two verses thinking that Jesus is simply expounding on the general characteristics of the church age. In other words, they think that this is a continuation of his statement that there will be wars and rumors of wars. In our mind, we read this passage of Scripture like this. There will be wars and rumors of war, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. So in our mind, it sounds like he's continuing to expound on his statement that there will be wars and rumors of war. And therefore, we just gloss over it. People, that's a big mistake. Big mistake. Because verses 7 and 8 is not a continuation of his previous statement in verses 5 and 6. He is not expounding on what he said in verse 6. This is meant to be taken as a completely new statement. It's easier to see in the Greek. I've said this before. You don't need a knowledge of Greek and Hebrew to understand 99% of the Bible. But there's 1% of the Bible that if you don't have a knowledge of Greek and Hebrew, you're lost. You're lost. This is one of those times. Yeah. This is meant to be taken as a completely new statement, and it's easy to see in the Greek because it ends verse 6 with, but the end is not yet. And verse 7 starts with the Greek word gar, which is a coordinating conjunction, but more importantly, it's an explanatory conjunction. So what he's doing is he's saying these things in verses 5 and 6, the end is not yet. But in verses 7 and 8, I'm going to explain what is the beginning of the birth pangs. And when you read this in Greek, you go, I see. So we're supposed to differentiate this statement from his previous statement. And let me show you why I say that. Look back at verses 7 and 8. I want you to underline the first part of verse 7.